Really was here.
We still gotta record it.
She's so fun. You're small. She's short of everyone goes, oh, you're so pregnant. Yeah, it's been like grandma. You're thinking like people are like, oh, I'm funny that. She's petite. She's pretty.
I got that when stuff that's not out of 6.
Awesome.
Wasn't real. I'll confirm it's mine. What do you need help with to prepare for that? I'm gonna get the buyer's packet.
Okay.
And is the offer, I guess I want an offer letter ready just in case too. Just to prepare for everything possible.
Okay.
To that stack stuff.
Okay.
Could I have you on contract initial, the as per MLS for the fee ahead of time? And so would you do it? Well, because I know it needs to be approved by you, so how would I will.
Why do you assume going into the appointment that you automatically are going to get whatever's in MLS? First of all, what's in MLS for the property?
I think it's 2.
Okay, so are you work 2 or you work 3.5 or you work 3?
I thought you said professionals, we have to do that.
I didn't say you have to do anything. I said you need an approval to do what you need to do. That's what I said.
Oh, okay. I thought it was something else that we did.
Really? So go ask Nicole that question. Because if that was the case, you wouldn't have nearly every single contract signed at 3%. Or Zillows.
So what's the deal with veterans then? Because I also.
Oh, for veterans, I keep thinking of the Zillow. Veterans, yes, we do.
Oh, because you
Like
said it.
That's veteran, it's my mistake.
Oh, okay.
See, I do make mistakes.
Okay, because I was confused. I was like, I thought I thought you said
And if you
that.
tell anybody, I'm gonna deny it.
So with veterans, you charge.
That's
what
correct.
rate?
Yeah,
Okay.
100%.
And that gets initial by you.
Yes.
Contract.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was delighted.
Oh, great. Okay.
Not a problem. Okay?
Yeah.
So you're here to really have the fun stuff. You got through the grind of the other Asian food camp, so congratulations, you're still alive.
Phase 2.
So now it begins. So
Oh, God.
the real fun stuff is that now part of your job, whether you're working for a buyer, working for sellers, to do what? Is to help them understand what the fair market value of the property is. Wouldn't you agree? In fact, wouldn't you agree that you have a fiduciary responsibility to tell them what the fair market value is? So once you tell your buyer what the fair market value is, which could be the list price, it could be above the list price, it could be below the list price, or you tell your seller it could be above what they wanted, less than what they wanted, or right at what they wanted, who gets to choose the price? Is it you, or is it somebody else? Okay. And if you're working with a buyer? Okay. So your job is to tell them what they need to hear, which is here's what I believe my opinion of value is, but be realistic in terms of their decision. Right? Especially these days, the conversation is something like this. So Eric, what should I offer on the house? I don't know. How badly do you want the house? The house is listed at 600. Do you think it will go above asking price? It's in Linfield.
Yeah.
Probably. How much? By a lot. What does that mean? So how much should I offer? I don't know. What is the house worth to you, and how much money are you willing to spend on it to get that house? Here's my opinion of value. It might be the same of the listing price or more than the listing price, but it might be a lot more than you're willing to offer. My job is to at least tell you what I believe the current value of the property is. So how do you determine what the current value of the property is? Or let's ask the question differently. What are the different values of the house? Because would you agree there are a variety of different values of the house that aren't always the same? Okay, so shout out some values of the house.
Price per square foot.
So I got dollars per square foot, that's a metric of the value, right? Okay.
Condition.
Condition is going to be part of the consideration, but I guess what I'm saying is,
Well,
that's, all right, look, that's one, assessed. What's assessed? Well, we'll come back to it. So you have an assessed value of a house, which is a determined value of a house by who?
Taxes,
What's that?
by taxes for the
You
assessed.
said by tax, you said by appraiser.
Appraised value is by appraiser.
Okay, so there's appraised value. We'll come back to who in a second. Okay, what other values are there?
Who's estimate?
Okay, I got it.
Technically.
I know people say that all the time, market value.
Okay, market value or fair market value. Okay. What else? What other entities or industries put values on houses?
What about like last?
Equity value or something with that?
So there's no more. Go ahead.
Loan to value?
Okay, so in relation to getting a loan, there might be right, and it's probably gonna be a little bit more under appraised value, but, right, there's believe it or not, there's under appraised value, you can have a purchase value. You can also have a refinance value. Whatever, some doesn't count for error. Okay? What's gonna happen when you get a loan? The lender is gonna do what? It's gonna require you to go get what in order to buy that house? Because they're taking that house as collateral, they wanna make sure nothing happens to the house, right? So what do you buy to protect the house?
Insurance, mortgage insurance.
Insurance, so is there an insurance value?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have homeowners insurance? Okay, so in homeowners insurance, there's sorry, write it down, maybe I get it wrong. There's replacement costs. And the cost to rebuild. Believe it or not, there are two different values in the insurance world. So by my metric, on any one house, you can have an appraised, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different values for a house. Oh, there's one more. There's a BPO. Anybody want to take a guess?
State.
Nope,
Before.
nope,
Building.
nope.
What does it relate to?
It's just fun.
An opinion of value.
Don't tell us.
Built?
I know.
What's that?
Did
Oh,
someone say
yeah.
built?
I did,
Nope.
yeah.
Buyer purchase offer or something? Something with an offer? Like an offer value?
No.
I'm sure it's close first.
Like equity value?
Kind of a misnomer, but you'll get it as soon as I write it down. Broker price opinion. Now, one could argue that when you're determining fair market value, that you're really giving them a broker price opinion, but I break them out differently for a very specific reason. I haven't been asked to do a broker price opinion in years. When we get into the realm of foreclosures and short sales, you may even be asked as an individual agent, we will certainly be asked as a company to do a number of broker price opinions. A broker price opinion is structured much in the same way as an appraisal. gonna get into all of that right now. Okay, so assessed value is, who does that? Tax man, right?
Mhm.
The assessor for a town. Okay, who does an appraisal?
Appraiser?
Appraiser, very good. Asking all the hard questions today. Is there a Mr. or Mrs. Zillow?
Somewhere in the world it probably is. I'm gonna change my last name to Zillow so I can say Mr. Zillow.
Is there literally a Mr. or Mrs. Zillow that goes and visits the house?
No.
No, it's called an algorithm. I know I was calling that wrong. Whatever. Market value is an agent or an agent, real estate agent. Insurance is who? An adjuster or an insurance, someone qualified with an insurance. People always call it an adjuster. And a broker price opinion is a broker. So why are there all these different kinds of ways of valuing a house?
Give you the best estimate, of course.
Is it possible those values are all the same? Possible, highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to understand what's the reasoning or the methodology, A, that they're using to determine value, and B, why are they determining value? So let's just go through each real quick. Assessed value, which is done by the tax man. What's the purpose of that value? To see what?
What they say, oh, in taxes.
Okay, and how do they do that?
By town.
It's done differently town to town. There is a state number of elements within the formula that are dictated by the state, like you have to go, it's really data that's used from 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the tax man coming in and saying, this house is worth X. Now, think about how towns work. Okay, towns there are two different forms of government. I'm getting more too detailed, but two different forms of government in towns or cities in the state of Massachusetts. There's the city form of government, which means what? There's an elected mayor, and there's either a selectman or a council that works in conjunction with. So the mayor is the executive part of the government. The council is the legislative part of the government, so on and so forth for that town. Or you have what are called town meetings, where there are selectmen are elected, and they're the executive body. They hire typically somebody called a town manager that carries out their directives and their decisions. And this legislative part of the government is you as the citizen, if you've ever heard of town meeting. So those are the two different forms of government, right? So town meeting, just so that you know, when you ever get into it, like Andover's town meeting, there's only typically one town meeting a year. So you're only voting on legislation once a year. They're called warrants, whether they're tax bills or whatever. The bottom line, though, is that for every town, whether it's a city form of government or town meeting form of government, they have a budget. And their budget is very simplistic. It really has two variables in it: the value of real estate in the town and the tax rate. And so what do most towns do? They say, I need $100 million in tax revenue to be able to operate the town, the municipal side of it, and the school side of it. And they have a two-part formula, so which they're going to monkey with one or the other. I'm either going to increase the tax rate to increase my taxes, because if you have an owned property, taxes never go down, right? Have your income taxes ever gone down? Your excise taxes for your cars ever gone down? Your real estate taxes, are they ever going to go down? Probably not. So there's two-part formulas. I have the mill rate. What's the dollar amount per $1,000 of value that the town charges every property owner? Typically, there's a bifurcated process where there's a commercial rate and a residential rate. When you get down into the likes of Boston, the commercial rate almost obliterates the residential rate. Up here in the sticks, it's the residential rate that predominantly drives the revenues. But you can see it's a little bit of an artificial value. Okay? You have this thing, just so that you're aware, you're a property owner every December, where your taxes come out quarterly in Massachusetts, semi-annually in New Hampshire. But in Massachusetts, in December, the new tax bill comes out for the next year with the new assessed value. You have 1 month, the month of January 1st to January 31st, to request an abatement. An abatement is a challenge to the town to say, I disagree with your value that you've assessed to my property. Okay? As real estate practitioners, once you're in the business for a while and you have a number of clients, it's possible you'll get that call in January saying, hey, can you help me figure out the assessed value of my property? Okay? Just know that it's going to happen. If you get there, call me, I'll help you with it. Okay? So that's the assessed value. Does the assessed value have a market-based component? Yes, it does. Is the assessed value, should it be used for determining market value? No. Why? Because it's arbitrary. Okay? I've owned my house for 20 years. Here's how many times the assessor's been in my house. Okay? Here's how many times the assessor's probably asked to get into my house. And here's how many times I've told them, you can come in my house. I choose not to let the assessor in. Okay? So the assessor is going to, they've gotten much smarter these days, they're picking up on building permits. So when I updated my master bath, they probably picked up on that, and that's going to push up my assessment a little bit. But it is absolutely unequivocally possible to have two houses built by the same builder at the same time and have two different assessed values over the course of time. What I mean by that, one never sells, so it has the original assessment and gets monkeyed around with on an annual basis based on that. The other one sells every 2 years, so there's a lot more market data on it, so the assessor's looking at that and adjusting it. I've literally seen the difference of two houses next to each other, pretty much the same thing. They can have hundreds of thousands of dollars in difference in assessed value because of the lack of transactions in one and another one having been sold as much. So just be aware of it. But it is not, your sellers are going to come to you and they're going to play that card all the time. If you give them a value that's less than assessed value, they're going to go, well, that's less than assessed value. You give them a value that's more than assessed value, they're going to say, well, wait a second. Should I be worried about assessed value? Assessed value has no impact on market value. Okay, and market value to us means what? Let's define that for you. What is market value? Or fair market value? What the house sells for. And what does that require for it to sell?
Ready, willing, and able buyer and seller.
Ready, willing, and able buyer and seller. Right? Look at it, Best Way, which just closed for me last week. All day long, that was a $750,000 house, but we had 5 offers on it. The buyer was willing to pay $825,000. And I think the seller even asked me when we were pricing it, should we price it higher? You can. Do you think we can get into the 8s? I doubt it. Okay, the only reason it got into 8 is because he had 5 different offers. And it went onto the market when there was 0 houses on the market in a $200,000 price range. Okay? Assessed value. Appraised value is done by an appraiser. Okay? Appraisals are these things it's an appraisal to task. Right? So what are the 2 tasks for an appraiser? I'm doing it as a purchase, or I'm doing it as a refinance. What does refinance mean? Speak up, please.
I keep saying it wrong, that's why.
You can tell I'm having a coffee. Come on.
Yeah. Refinancing is probably getting a better rate.
So you're doing one of 2 things. You're restructuring your debt. You're replacing the debt you have on it with something else. In many cases, it's either to lower your payments because you're getting a better rate, or in many cases, especially in today's environment where people are getting priced out of homes, they're saying, okay, you know what? I can't go buy that home across the street that I want that's bigger, but I have an existing home and I have a lot of equity on it. So why can't I take some of the equity from that house, literally pull it out of the house and use it for an addition, or use it for something else that I need? It's a home equity line of credit, or a HELOC, as you might commonly refer to it. So do you guys remember the story I talked about the Acton house and how I priced it at $999 and he wanted it at $1,000,001 because he had a refinance? That was an appraisal to pass. Appraisers generally lag the market. We'll get into that in a second. But that was an appraisal to pass. And so the appraiser came out, or the bank, before they sent out the appraiser, they said, this guy's looking to take out whatever it was, 2 or 3 or 4 or 600, I think when they went to buy a house, they were taking $600,000 out of their primary residence to buy another residence. And so in doing that, they looked at the loan to value, the current loan to value, the debt to equity ratio. Then they added in the additional debt, the additional equity they wanted to strip out. And that's how they got to 1.1 million, and they kind of worked backwards from there. You'll find in your career, if you've been out on any,
I was out one, but I wasn't paying attention. I was just opening the door.
almost always you open the door and you hand them a purchase and sale, and they look at the purchase and sale, and bingo, they're almost always at or above the price. And again, it depends on the appraiser and whatnot. So it's an appraisal to test. Doesn't mean that every purchase property is going to be the value of the property by the appraised value of the property is going to be at that purchase price. It may or may not be. There is some interpretation, if you will, or some subjectivity in that process for the appraiser. The estimate we already talked about, it's an algorithm, right? It's an algorithm that gets refined day in and day out. It's looking at public data. It's looking at all kinds of things. But unlike an assessor who may or may not get into your property, unlike the appraiser who will get into your property unless there's a lot of data on it, like I'm refinancing my house. I've refinanced a couple of times. There's been a bunch of sales of houses, similar houses on my street. I didn't have to have an appraiser come through. They did what's called a desktop appraiser because there's so much data in the immediate micro area of my house that's recent that the system said, hey, there's enough data here. We don't need to send an appraiser. We're comfortable with an algorithm-based appraisal. But Zillow goes out and looks at public record, it looks at sales data. What it doesn't take into account is the condition of the house. There's no Mr. and Mrs. Zillow, this is why I asked the question, that goes into the house and looks at the condition of the house. Because, Jessica, didn't you tell me that condition is a factor of pricing? Of course it is, right? Price reflects everything. Market value. Market value is what a real estate agent's going to do. They're going to use a process, you're going to be taught a process that's similar to how an appraiser determines value, except you're going to interject an element of economic theory that the appraiser will not. I'll leave you hanging, because I know you're all waiting to hear that. Okay. Insurance, what's the difference between replacement and rebuild?
Rebuild is it rebuild because you're starting from scratch, or replacement is kind of replacing something that it's like a flood came in, how much it costs to replace section of.
So replacement is replacing it at the condition that it's at. So if I have for mica counters, that's what my replacement cost is going to estimate for me, is that there's some catastrophe, a fire, a flood, or whatever, in which the counters have to be replaced. I'm going to get a value based on the replacement of today's replacement cost of that vinyl or mica top. Versus rebuild means I'm rebuilding from the ground up with today's standard of materials. So wouldn't you agree today's standards of material in almost every house, even the vinyl floors are now luxury vinyl floors, right? You're not seeing a lot of the stuff that you saw, in the 90s and the early 2000s and 10 years ago in terms of building material. Everything has kind of been upgraded along the way. It's hard to find a brand new construction, even in the low end where you can find them, where you don't have hardwood floors, you don't have enough upgraded carpeting, so it changes with time. But the cost to rebuild is, what's it going to cost me today if I have to build this house today? This is replacing my worn cabinets with worn cabinets, or the value of the worn cabinets. Okay. And then broker price opinion is structured on almost the identical form that the appraisers use, and therefore it doesn't typically incorporate that one element of economic theory that you as an agent are going to do. So if you were to take the 2 or 3 pages of meat, the property data, From a broker price opinion versus an appraiser, you probably couldn't tell the difference. Where you're gonna see the difference is in the explanation and in the comparison and in the adjustments. Make sense? So there's lots of different value. We could go on for days. Wouldn't you agree with me that there's a value to the home, even within a home inspection, there's a valuing of the house based on economic life of the furnace and, economic life of this material and that material. Okay? Questions so far? Okay.
Do you, or does anyone ever recommend an appraiser?
Always. Not always, but yes, often. And I'll give you some examples of that.
If I remember correctly, on one side you can recommend, on one side you're not allowed to recommend.
That would be the home inspector. If you're working with a buyer client, you can recommend a home inspector. If you're working with a buyer customer, you cannot. Okay. Now, there are three formal ways to determine value of real estate. Who knows what they are? So I'll jump out of those.
Three ways to value.
Three ways to determine value of real estate. Forget everything don't forget everything we just talked about, but there are really only three ways for whether it's us as real estate agents and practitioners or appraisers to determine value of real estate.
Three that just have to do with the bedrooms, bathrooms, and square footage?
No, this is like that, if you tear down and rebuild it, that's one of those.
So the cost to build,
Yeah.
right? What does it cost me to build this acquire the land and build the property? Okay, that's one. Two,
Comparables.
comparable sales method. Comparable sales meaning I'm going to look back in history within a certain time frame. I'm going to look for similar homes with similar conditions and similar locations, and I'm going to draw or extrapolate conclusions from that to determine value. And what's the third one?
Wait, is that the third one?
Guys, that's the way I write them, but
Okay, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure.
keep it on your toes. Okay, the third one is more so for commercial property only because it's the income method. What is that? So if you've been at any of our meetings and you've heard some of us throw out terms like cap rate or APOD or what's the cash on cash return, that's all based on the income that the property either is generating or potentially can generate, work through down to certain numbers. I will even tell you, not for this class, that if I have 2 or 3 pieces of information, I can probably determine the value of the commercial piece of real estate within about 30 seconds. And we'll teach you how to do that because none of your competitors really know how to do that. But not today. Okay, so would you agree that the cost to build is really very unrealistic in our market here? And if so, why? Say it again. There's not a lot of land. So there's not a lot of building. So the cost of construction is generally much higher here than it would be where? Say a place like Texas or the Southwest or even the South where there's oodles of land, lots of cheap labor, and access to many materials. The fact of the matter is that in the last year, lumber alone has increased by a factor of 100%.
You know the fires affect that too, because we're losing lumber.
Can you? Yep.
Just by last year.
Just by last year. That has to do with the trade war with China, it has to do with the COVID, it has to do with forest fires, it has to do with geopolitical, you name it. All right. So let's talk about an appraiser's methodology of how they go about it, because I want you to use something similar, or we're going to model our comparable sales method to what they do. If you look at an appraiser, so an appraisal, you cannot do an appraisal. Why?
A license.
Okay, and what?
You need a license to do an appraisal.
You need a license to do it. You need to be a licensed appraiser, so you were correct. We're not appraisers. So if somebody comes to you and says, I need an appraiser, great. Are you looking for maybe a price opinion or fair market value? I can do that for you, but I can't do an appraisal because I'm not going to hand you an appraisal report, which is a standardized format that the appraisers must follow, and standardized methodology that they must follow. Okay? So part of that is, remember that whether it's an appraisal or the fair market value, what you're giving somebody when you hand them that fair market value or broker price opinion is you're giving them a snapshot in time. You're looking at it and saying, as of today, that's what it's worth. Why would that be?
For the appraisal method,
You want,
because the market changes
how often does the market change?
every day.
It sure does. Okay. How can a market change every day? A real estate market. It's not like it's the stock market where you've got hundreds of millions, if not billions of shares readily available and millions, if not hundreds of millions of people looking to trade. It's not as liquid as the equity market. Supply and demand, okay? But how many homes are for sale in Andover right now, do you think? Oh, somewhere in the 40s.
Oh, 40. I think I'm thinking about it.
49,
Is that a lot of homes? Is that a little homes?
Not a lot.
down a ton from last year.
Okay. So I can tell you there was a time 10, 12 years ago when there was probably 300 for sale. Do you think that changes what the value of the property is at that point in time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Give you a little story just to accentuate it. So I sold a house in 2003 to a nice young couple over on Summer Street in North Andover. They bought the house for $203,000 in 2003. Fast forward to 2010. So we were just starting the upswing from a down market. They had gone and had themselves a couple kids, so their little 2-bedroom ranch, their little 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom ranch was just too small for them. And they wanted to buy a bigger house. And like most people in that situation, we were in a situation where they were starting to see the houses that they want. We were getting into competitive situations, not quite like where we're at. So they made the determination that they were going to have to sell first, find some unlikely to time it, so they were going to have to find something which they were fine with. I went out in the middle of August and did their initial CMA. And when they did the initial CMA at the time, there were 10 other homes, 2-bedroom homes in North Andover on the market, and only one had sold in the last 6 months. Okay? And so as I went through this process with them, based on the data that I have, based on my humble opinion, after doing my analysis, I came to them and said, hey, good news is your house, we can sell your house. The bad news is you bought it for $203. I'm telling you it's probably worth it was $305 they bought it for. So you bought it for $305 in 2003. The market's starting to come back, but there's all this inventory on the market. Your house, I'm sorry to tell you, is worth $275. Do you think they were happy or sad? Probably not happy. They've lost $28,000 in equity. So they understood what the risks were. They were willing to move forward. We walked through the house. I gave them a list of things to do, and based on what was going on in the market, I suggested to them, let's wait until we get through Labor Day weekend. Let's reevaluate the house at that particular point in time in terms of value. And we'll look at the value based on the work I've given you to do. Can you get the work done in time? Yes, they can. So I go back a week after Labor Day, and we sit down and we go through it again, and all of a sudden, They said, so what do you think, Eric? Are we still at 275? Can we get 280? I looked at them and said, better yet, you can get 315.
Okay, the house sold.
Because all 9 of the houses that were on the market were either under agreement or sold, where they were just listed for sale 5.5 weeks earlier. So we saw this uptick in demand. What was driving the demand at the time, you may or may not remember it, depending on where you were in your lives, but the government came out with this first-time home, the federal government came out with the first-time home buyer program. Do you remember it, Julie?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it really drove that end of the market. So everybody was out trying to find a house because it made more sense to buy a house than to rent and so on and so forth. So in the short term of 5 weeks, they went from a market value of 275 to 315. That's not, in real estate, 5 weeks is not a long time. But it speaks to what Luciano said very accurately, is that it changes daily. And it changes daily because things come on the market, things come off the market. What's the supply and the demand? And that's what we really need to get into. So, but any value that you give somebody is point in time for that day or up till the time that that analysis is done. And it's going to change. There's a chance it can change from there to when you go list, even if it's a week later. There's a chance it will change. There's a greater chance it will change over the longer the time is between when you give them that value and when you go to either list the property or you make an offer on the property. Does that make sense? Because there's so much can happen in between. So it's point in time. These appraisals are generally what I would call a little bit of a look backwards. When you look at appraisers and appraisers report, it looks something like this. You have the subject property, which is the property you're working to determine the value. And then you have comp 1, comp 2, and comp 3. That's page 1. These are active properties in MLS. Okay. Page 2, very similar. Subject property, comp 1, comp 2, and comp 3. These are sold. This is sold data. So these are sold, and the criteria on the sold is that it should not be more than less than 6 months old. Okay. Where possible, in both cases, what the standard for an appraiser is that it's within a 1 mile radius. Now, I'm going to say that with a grain of salt. Because wouldn't you agree right now, depending on where you are in Andover, a 1 mile radius could include Lawrence, Methuen, Salem, New Hampshire, and maybe one other town? So unlike the Midwest, which is built on these grid systems, and it's easier for you to get to these one mile concentric circles around a property, much harder to do in New England, where the lot lines, are hundreds of, are centuries old or hundreds of years old. But the fact of the matter that sold data is never older than 6 months. Why? Because we just told you that the longer the time period, the greater the chance there is a change. Following me?
Yeah.
Okay, what else does an appraiser look at? So when they do this, they're going to list here the address of the house. They're going to list the number of bedrooms, the number of full baths, the number of half baths. They're going to list the total number of rooms. Bathrooms is not included in the number of rooms. They're going to look at the square footage of the house. They're going to look at the square footage of the land. They're going to look at, in theory, they're going to look at the location, right? That's why the 1 mile radius guideline is what we'll do for it. They're going to look at the condition, ultimately what they're going to do is they're going to compare not only the attributes of this house. This one has 3 bedrooms. This one, does this have 3? Does this have 4? Does this have 2? Depending, obviously they're trying to get comparables that are most similar to the subject property. Yes.
Why did bathrooms not count? Because I know if you have like a 3-bedroom house with 1 bath, it's usually a big difference between a 3-bedroom and 2 bath.
They don't count as part of the room count.
Okay.
Okay, they count, but they don't count as a room count.
Okay, like total room.
Yep. And now with all the open floor plans that are being built these days, it's hard to discern between the kitchen and the dining room, or the kitchen, the dining room, the family room. So there's unfortunately a bit of subjectivity that comes into that. Okay. Write down gross living area.
So does that add value to the house, the number of rooms, because like now people want open floor plans and stuff, so they don't want a lot of rooms. Okay.
I don't generally do my comparable by the number of rooms. I might more specifically look at the number of bedrooms, because I don't want to compare a 4-bedroom to a 2-bedroom.
Yeah.
But whether a house has 11 rooms in it or 6 rooms in it, both houses could be 4,500 square feet. The number of rooms isn't necessarily indicative of the value. It's the square footage that is more indicative of what the value is. Okay? But if one house has one more full bathroom, would it stand to everything else the same? Wouldn't it stand to reason that there was more money used to construct that property and therefore more value?
That makes sense. I just didn't talk about that.
No, it's a perfectly legitimate question. Okay, so we're looking at these different things with condition, right? So we're looking at the attributes of the property. We're also looking at the condition of those attributes. All right, would you agree that every house that has a kitchen has countertops, but some might be vinyl, some might be Formica, some might be Corian, some might be granite, some might be quartz, some might be some other concrete, some might be butcher block. What's the difference in value between that? If everything else is the same, is that going to contribute to a difference in value? Okay. Is it old versus new? What do most buyers want? Most buyers want move-in, ready to go. There's very few buyers out there that's willing to say, okay, I'll take that piece of crap and do something with it and move my family into it. But there are some. Most people don't have the time, the energy, the desire to go do a lot of renovations. Yes.
Would you say now would be a time when people would kind of look at a property and say, you know what, I'll work with it because there's not much available and this is where I want to be?
The smarter buyers are, but they also have to have two things. They have to have the wherewithal to be able to deal with the projects themselves, and they need the financial ability to do it, because, you know, if you don't get a renovation loan which will help to fund those renovations, you have to fund them out of your pocket. Not everybody has an extra $10, $20, $30, $50, $100,000 of cash lying around to do renovations, right? So all things, you know, as I'm saying these things should all be starting to register in your head in terms of, okay, as I'm doing this, I need to give weight to the things that, you know, isn't there going to be more demand for the move-in ready condition properties than the properties that are run down and need renovation? And which is going to have a greater value? The one that is move-in ready condition, because nobody has to do anything, nobody has to spend money to get there. But the value of you could have two properties, again, same age, same location, one updated, one not updated. The one that isn't updated probably, once updated, is the same value as the other one, just by standard reasoning, right? Let's jump off this and come back to dollars per square foot, because Mariah brought it up. Dollar per square foot, do you think that's a good metric that helps determine or compare value of a property?
Because it has to do with the value to calculate that.
Explain, please.
I mean, $1 per square foot, you take the price of the property and divide it by the number of square feet to get it.
Right.
So that's, if you're looking for what that number is, then you will really know the $1 per square foot.
Right,
Oh,
but
so
so
the-
what I'm asking is how good of a metric is that in terms of your analysis? Should I be using that metric as one of my key indicators of value, to determine value? As I compare property to your property to your property to the property.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you're comparing properties, then it would be important, right? But not to figure out the value of the said property.
Well, remember, your method is you're getting to a value of this property by comparing this one to that, comparing this one to that, comparing this one to that, and in appraisers' world, they make mechanical adjustments. So subject A has a deck, property number one doesn't. There's going to be an adjustment for the fact that this has a deck because there's a value associated with that. The appraisers have predetermined mechanical adjustments, right? I think you may, if you're on one of the meetings lately, Lynn was talking about the appraisals and, you know, a finished lower level or basement. You know, the seller's going to come in and say, I spent $100,000. That's great. The most you're probably going to get for it, Mr. Seller, on an appraisal, a bank appraisal, is probably $25,000, because that's the standardized adjustment for that. But I want to come back to dollars per square foot. Would you agree with me, Mariah, that if you have two houses built next to each other by the same builder with the same building materials, same set of specifications to build the house, meaning the same materials and everything else in it, the labor is going to be the same because you're building at the same time, your materials are going to be bought at the same time, that dollar per square foot ought to be the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens over time when house A remains unrenovated? So fast forward 15 years, house A has not had a single renovation since the day it was built 15 years ago. House B just went through, they just updated it to 2.5 baths, so they just renovated 2.5 baths and a new kitchen. So they dropped $100,000 into that house. Is the dollar per square foot the same? How do you know? And why wouldn't you? Right, but why?
The specifics of it are different.
Okay. So what I'm going to throw out to you is that your sellers in particular will look at a metric, a generalized metric of dollars per square foot, and I will tell you it's about as inaccurate a metric as you can get. Because that dollar per square foot incorporates what? Everything about the property. It incorporates the land. It incorporates the house. It incorporates the age. It incorporates the condition. It incorporates the amenities. And unless you have two houses that are identical, what good is that value? Even if you have two houses that are identical, one's been renovated and one doesn't, in theory, if you don't know that it's been the other house that you're comparing hasn't been renovated, you don't know that, then you're not doing an accurate analysis. And you will have the same dollar per square foot. The only time I would recommend you even reference dollar per square foot is during new construction, because at least you can quantify when something's being built new, are those specifications similar to the other specifications of the house you're comparing it to. That's your bedtime.
Yeah.
Eric,
Okay.
is dollars per square foot used a lot? I feel like in commercial properties, because I know when I had the studio, that's how, like, you know, your rent is, or it incorporates a lot like that. So is that, am I talking something totally different?
It's a little different in so much as when you rented the space.
Yes.
Okay, so when you're renting the space, now we're talking about, we're not going to, different class for a different day, but you're talking about a dollar per square foot, which means that if I had a 3,000 square foot space that I was looking to rent commercially, and it was $10 per square foot, what's my rent? It's 10 times 3,000, so it's $30,000 over a year. I can then divide that down by the 12 months to get to my per. So that dollar per square foot is just a leasing metric.
Okay.
Very different than what we're saying in terms of the actual value of the property. You will never hear in a commercial setting. If you do, you'll know that the broker has no idea what they're talking about. In a commercial setting, you generally don't talk about dollars per square foot when it's a sale of a commercial property or a purchase of a commercial property.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, every property is so unique, especially in the commercial world. This building compared to that building across the street, you can't see it, but building across the street, both are used for office and or retail-like spaces, but the construction is so different, right? I know that this building is a little bit more expensive on a per square foot basis because I look at the materials that we've used to build it.
Mm-hmm.
Superior to what was used to build that. Okay. So let's get down to let's see, mechanical adjustments. So the one thing that's interesting, if you remember when I told you about the appraiser's report, these are active properties. These are sold properties. So I refer to it as kind of this look in the mirror, right? I'm looking back as long as, I'm looking in my rear view mirror, if you will, as far as 6 months to get data. And then I'm comparing that data to the subject property to determine the differences between the two. And as an appraiser, I make an adjustment. Then I come up here as an appraiser and I do the same thing, but these are active properties. What do you know about an active property? We know what the list price is. What does that mean? Is the list price the value of the property? And has the buyer been willing to pay it?
Not yet.
So in my humble opinion, now the banks rely on them because you're structured standardized reports, but in my humble opinion, that's why appraisers aren't in the real estate business, meaning buying and selling real estate, because the appraisers use a different methodology. They don't account for supply and demand. And what I'm about to teach you should help you quantify supply and demand. Okay? Here's how we as agents determine supply and demand now. Madison, you don't have MLS. Julie, you don't have MLS yet, so I apologize. Sometimes this may sound a little foreign, but when you're looking at your data in MLS and you're asking the data, you select several criteria as your data, to frame your data. You're going to ask MLS to return you values that are for active property, under agreement, UAG, and sold within the last 6 months. I will tell you right now, which is more relevant data, 3-month-old properties or 6-month-old properties? You asking me or telling me?
Telling me.
Okay. Why is that, Madison?
Sold within the last 6 months.
Jessica's argument is that property sold in the last 3 months is more relevant data to my subject property in determining value than properties that sold in the last 6 months or from month 4 or 5 or 6. Why would that be?
I would assume because, like he said, if the market changes every day, then the closer you get, it would be more accurate.
Correct. So depending on your town, you're always looking for a data set size, right? If you don't have a lot of, I would say in today's market, with as fast as things are coming and going off the market, where your average days on market in most towns are single digits, no more than 2 weeks, I would say absolutely keep it to, 3 months or less. And if you can do less, the more relevant it becomes. When we get into those markets, when we get into a screaming buyer's market, and the number of days on market for property goes from 7 on average to 47, then you're going to have to start stretching that out closer to 6 months. For very unique properties, you may have to go beyond that. What do I mean by unique properties?
Horse farm.
Horse farm. Have we sold any of those?
I'm sure we have it now.
Mm-hmm.
The one in Townsend and stuff.
Right. Antiques. Right. And if you're familiar with Andover, if you drive under the Plum Bridge and take a left, it's the oldest house in Andover. It was built in 1690. We sold it. How many comps out there are there for houses built in 1690? Not many. How many houses out there were built in the 1700s? A few, but not that many. And how many do you think have sold in the last 6 months? So you have to understand what you're looking to do your analysis on and adjust accordingly. Let me give you a long-winded example. So a couple of years ago, I took a listing in North Andover. That house was built in 1708. Beautifully renovated. I mean, it was as modern as any newly built house. Okay.
Steven Stewart.
You remember?
Yeah.
Right?
It would still need a lead paint document, or unless.
Absolutely, unequivocally would, because
The foundation.
no, well, the house itself, so the original, so here's the story on the property in the house. As you went up to the property, Luciano will remember.
You want me to play the video?
Yeah, look at the video. So they can see.
How much is the one your front door sell for?
It was 15 years ago. But
I remember it being on the.
that house is haunted, but that's a different story.
Did you sell it? You lost, you gotta tell me.
I was never asked.
I can like feel it. Just feel it in there. I always lose service right there too. Yeah, that's right.
Was it 10, Steven? Oh,
What degree of comparative analysis do you do before you go show a house? Be ready for the question of the types of.
Let's watch the video. We'll watch Lucian Handy or Lucian, Adrian.
Oh, that's a nice house. Ooh. Wow. Is this the fourth one?
No, this is the antique that was built in 17th
Sorry.
6-car garage.
Oh. Oh, I love it.
So do you see that? See this right here, this garden up here?
Yeah.
This foundation here is from the original house that was built back in the 1650.
Wow, probably cute animals.
Didn't like the Indians
So what happened,
burn
the
it
story
down?
behind the house is that house was burned to the ground during the last Indian raid in the Andovers in 1693. In which point the 16-year-old daughter was either abducted or killed, but was never seen again.
Oh my gosh. So this house is haunted?
No.
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 Made of horn bridge.
So that's the foundation that's used as a garden from the original house built back in the early mid-1600s. When you go up into, I don't know if I can show you, but if you go up into the existing house, which is about right there, built in 1708. Up in the attic, you can actually see dirt timber, because what they do back then, reuse the wood. So the wood from that house would be in here.
What about the pieces?
Okay, that painting was done by the then current owner. But this house was built in 2 stages. The original house was built in 1708, which was originally was what would be referred to as the Gregorian architectural style.
that painting there, that was of the actual property of what it looked like back in the day.
Yeah, and North Andover in general.
Wow.
This section, there was a fire at the house, 1720, and it got to what's called the first generation architecture of the house. And it's distinctive. This is all the original beaming. When you get into the corners of the beaming, you see the beaming go up, and the branches off it is called the sunspot. That's the original outdoor kitchen, that's the summer kitchen. That was an addition. Coming back to the summer kitchen. The summer kitchen was embedded in the mid-1800s. And then coming back to the main part of the house. Wood on the fireplace up here is from the original flooring in the house.
That's good.
And that was, they were doing a renovation, they found out renovation, that's how they learned about the fire. Because of all the scorched wood was in the house. The story, the detail, the house was interesting.
The sellers actually did like a narrated version of the video where they talked over it. Yeah.
There's so much history in the house. The house saw George Washington. Walk one down. She was a designer by not original.
And they didn't want to sell the house to anybody who wasn't going to keep it like this. Yeah.
People that bought it. Yep. See that? See the corner?
Yeah.
You see that? You see how that it looks like an upside down, long gun, upside down? That's called a gun stop. That was only good. That only happened in the early 70s.
Oh, I love the light. How many bedrooms?
Wow. And fourth well.
Wow.
Well, I mean, that's
Way back there. So here was what we're just on that property. Ultimately, it is their soul. So when I went and met with these people, they were a personal referral of mine from a very long-term client of mine. When I went to visit them for the first house, I mean, I have never been grilled like that house. So what I had to do was, one, they walked me through the house so that I could understand and go do my analysis. And then two, part of my interview when I came back, this was a personal referral, mind you, because I was one of 3 agents that was being interviewed, was I had to be able to do a 10 to 15-minute walking tour of the house with them, telling them all about the history of the house. So I had to kind of cram for my.
You were like a historic target.
I was like a historic target. Okay. So when in my first round of speaking with them as I walk through the house, I do what you're going to be taught to do, which is to qualify. And I found out that they were looking for, at the time, they were looking for that house to be at $1.4 million or $1.5 million. I knew that. And so I started doing mine after I walked through and got my analysis, because I know that they had the 2 other brokers. One was a personal friend of theirs that had done lots of antiques up in Newburyport. And the other was, there's one firm out of Worcester that exclusively specializes in antique homes. And their values that they came back with were at $1,425,000 and $1,495,000. So there was almost $100,000, $75,000 spread out. I came back and they said, so what do you think? And I said, I think that you have to be under $1.3 million. They almost had a heart attack. Almost had a bloody heart attack. And they said, well, why? And so I said, let me walk you through my analysis. Number one, you shared with me the analysis that the other people did. And what they did was they went out to other towns. One went to Andover and pulled out an old home, same age, same type of renovation, but it was in Andover. Another comp was in Lexington. And another comp was in Newburyport. And another comp was, and so they were using the data from other towns. And I suggested to them that, based on my training, that would be flawed data because it's not reflective of the value of the town. My data came from, I went back not 6 months, I went back 5 years in the town of North Andover to find similar properties, and I extrapolated forward using what the typical rate of appreciation was for that 5-year period. They said, we understand where you're coming from, but that's not where we're at. We want to be at $1.4 million. So, Jonathan, you asked me about an appraiser. My response to them was, okay, well, you understand where I'm at. You've got these other 2 that are well above. Why don't you do this? I'll put you in touch with an appraiser. Let's have the appraiser do work, and then you can decide who you want to hire and why, and then you can determine value based on an uninterested third party. The appraiser came back at $1,269,000. So I got lucky. Okay, or that's what they told me. The appraiser came back at $1,299,000, which is what they told me. I later found out from the appraiser only came back at $1,249,000. So they inflated the value anyway. But anyway, so I had this listing for almost a year. Because there was a little swing in the market, and guess what? As beautiful as that house was, and it was beautiful, not many people want to own a house. That was the cleanest, nicest 300-year-old basement I've ever seen in my entire life. Okay, with history, there's a rock passage to an old Underground Railroad passage in there. I mean, the house is just built with all this history, but they were unrealistic about the price. I got them to do a $50,000 price drop. That didn't do it. And then when I went for another $50,000 price drop, they felt that they needed a change. They didn't feel that I was doing the right marketing and so on and so forth. I mean, we ran ads for them. We did all kinds of stuff.
We had events at the property, like cheese and wine events.
Yeah. Right. We pulled out all the stops, and ultimately they hired a new agent who sold it for $50,000 less. So anyway, but the moral of the story is that you have to be mindful of what your analysis is. Going outside of the town is taboo. I think we've done it once in all of the properties that Williams sold over the years. We did an analysis maybe once where we had to literally go outside because there was no data. There was no data recent, there was no past data. It was such a unique house that we could only find one or two in the towns surrounding us in total.
What type of house is it?
The house in Andover it was one of the ones on Central Street. Now, the ones on Central Street here in Andover are very
Is that
large.
one?
It was a very pink one. And at the time, there was nothing like it that hadn't sold in Andover in more than 10 years.
The Victorian.
It was a Victorian. But I mean, the money, he put 10 million,
Was it the Borstel house? No.
No.
Near
it
there.
was next to it,
Yeah, I know.
the pink house.
Yeah.
And he ended up putting 3 or 4 million into that house when he got it. So it was very difficult to comp. We literally had to go out to Lexington to try to find a house with a similar type of material, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So the point I'm getting at all this is that you can't, I want you to use as much of a standardized methodology to this, but there's a lot of subjectivity into it. We talked about you want to pull your active joint agreement sold. Here's what that data will tell you. Sold is always going to give you some type of approximate value. So all things equal, if you have a sold property within the last 3 months, it's probably going to, and everything else is identical about the property, it's probably in that realm. But you want to consider, right, we talked about supply and demand, that appraisers aren't really looking at supply and demand because they're looking at actives, which haven't sold yet, so we don't know what they sold for, and we're looking at what has sold. I'm going to teach you to look at used, under agreement, and active to help you determine supply and demand. How do you do that? Well, under agreement is what? Under agreement in theory, for the most part, is properties that have had an accepted offer, have been through a home inspection, typically anyway, and have signed a purchase and sale. And so if you have a larger number of these in comparison to so this is your demand, right? This is your indication of demand, and active is your indication of supply. Okay, so active, how many are on the market? What's my inventory? What's inventory right now? It's nothing. What was the inventory in that example I gave you about the ranch at the start of all this? There were 10 on the market in August, and there was 1 on the market active 6 weeks later. We went from a large supply to a short supply because what happened, there was a spike in demand, and what we saw was the number of under agreements went way up, and the supply came down, so there wasn't enough supply keeping up with the demand. You guys remember this from Economics 101, right? People think what we do is rocket science. Everything is factored about price in real estate. Everything is about the price. Okay? But by looking at these things, you want to look at other indicators called days on market. Well, you have days to offer, and you have days on market. What is the difference? Days to offer is property goes live in MLS. It starts ticking every 24 hours. It adds a single day. Days to offer, when we put an offer contingent, which means it has an accepted offer, the days to offer clock stops. So that tells me how many days was it on the market until there was an accepted offer. That's a relatively new metric. That's just the last couple years, 4 or 5 years in MLS.
And then days to offer.
Days to offer, DTO.
Yep.
Then you have DOM, days on market. So the old timers in the business, the Lillian, the Eric, the Bobs, because DTO didn't exist until recently, we always looked at days on market, which was the amount of time between when the property listed and it went under agreement, meaning there was a signed offer, there was a home inspection, and now it's on purchase and sale. I personally still use days on market because it's a more solid metric. Days to offer, what are you seeing now? You do see, even in the realm of multiple offers, you do see a contingency of buyers that will go out, rush in, throw in some ridiculous price on the property, get the offer accepted, and then wake up the next morning and go, holy shit, what did I do? And they pull out of it. So I don't like to use days to offer because it can fluctuate, because properties can come and go pretty quickly. So I'm still the believer that the metric of days on market is really the better metric. Fewer days on market means what? There was good demand for that individual property. Larger days on market means that there wasn't so much demand on it. That has to be looked at the more economic terms for you, the macro and the micro level. The micro level, one second, is the individual property, how many days on market did the property have to sell? That you're using to compare it to, versus what is days on market for all of the properties at the macro level. So I call it zooming in and zooming out. You got to look at your data set and look at it from the 30,000 foot view. What does this mean with all of this data? And then I got to zoom down to the individual property level, and I've got to extract information from each of it. Yes, yeah.
So when you have a property, let's say it's been on the market for a month, when do you think about lowering the price a little bit? Like how long?
So here's the Eric's agent's guide to properly managing a listing. It is. So, and I would suggest to you that if you follow these rules, there's a pretty good chance you'll make a lot of money in your career. Not because I'm telling you, and it's not really my rules because I learned them from Morley. I'm just rewriting them a little bit because I'm teaching the class.
You can make it a brochure.
There you go. So here's a conversation I have with every seller. So let me tell you what's going on. Let me tell you about how I manage the listing for you, because number one, getting the price right is the single greatest marketing thing that I can do for your property. Because if we get it wrong, not only will we know it, I can float the Goodyear blimp over your house for 30 days and have the Rolling Stones play a concert at your house. It's not going to sell your house. No matter what I do, if it's the wrong price, it ain't going to sell. So number one, it's all about price. So I got to get that right the first time. So that's why I'm always going to tell you what you need to hear when it comes to price versus what you want to hear. Here's how I'm going to manage your listing. Number one, once we go live, right, you see this printout, and I'll show you online the printout, but in MLS, I bring a printout of the active, the under agreements, and the sold in the data set that I use to determine the value of the property. And I save that as a search in MLS, and I send that out to them every single Monday. Because every single Monday, Mr. Seller, you and I are going to have a call. You tell me whether it's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you want on Tuesday, we'll do Tuesday, whatever it is. I want a weekly cadence call where we're going to review the following. We're going to review what's changed in the market, because you will have this original printout that I'm giving you now. And every week from that you're listed live in MLS, I'm going to send you that same list. And we're going to look at the changes in the market, if any, because it's possible there are no changes, but we're going to look at the changes in the market. We're also going to review how many showings have you had? How many visits did you have? Did we have an open house and how much activity? What's the feedback from those showings or that open house activity? And is there anything else that is playing into your house, either having an offer or not having an offer? But here's what I know from doing this for 20 years. I know that, especially in today's market, in the first 14 days, in a more normalized market, it's the 21 days, and a little bit more of a buyer's market, it's 28 days. But I know in today's market, in the first 14 days, because we are in such a white hot seller's market, that if you haven't had 8 to 10 showings, you're overpriced. And I would argue to you that in today's market, if I've had 8 showings and we have no offers, or if I've had 10 showings and no offers, we're off by price from anywhere from 1% to 3%. I know that if we have 8 or less showings in that same time period, we're probably off anywhere from 3 to 5%. How do I know that? Because I crunch all the numbers all the time.
Is it better if it's an open house showing? Is that different than showing?
Those are private showings. Okay. Right. Now, if you want to factor in the showings for the open house, I would, because we're in COVID and not, it's a little bit of a different world. But I would just say 8 to 10 showings. You should have 8 to 10 showings in that first 2 weeks, and we should be able to negotiate an offer for you. Right. Quite honestly, in many cases, unless there's a lot of supply at that moment in time, you have a good chance of getting multiple offers.
So speaking of achievement hunters and that, which John, Julie, and I have all been there. So I think it went on. My first open house, is September 11th. I'm sure. Could be wrong on that, but early September. So I guess I just talked about that one.
I think that one's just a tough sell.
Why?
because I can fight them there every weekend. Well, your eye level is at power line,
Yeah.
and they're really close to the house on every floor. The next door neighbor is like kind of a, what do you say, order of good?
Yeah, it's, all those things though affect the price, and even though it was priced right before we knew of those issues,
Yeah.
now that we realize that those are issues, that's why the price should be lower. I'm sure she will soon.
You're in Reading.
No, but it's very.
You're in Reading.
No, I know, it's very up and down too, there's like.
You're in Reading. So what does that tell you about the property?
Wait, is it Reading selling pretty like crazy now?
Yes.
Except for the property.
What? No, well, no, that's why it's,
Bing, bing, bing.
it's 99. Yeah, because it's one middle. And then, what was the other issue that I had?
Stairs.
Oh, I know, I forgot. Across the street from you is an auto body shop. That's another issue, sorry.
So,
I'm
is it priced properly?
I think it has to go
Okay.
down.
Now take the metrics that I just told you. And we had more than 8 to 10 showings inclusive of open houses in the first 14 days.
I actually don't know.
Okay.
because
Have we had more than 8 to 10 showings in the first 28 days? Because it's been on the market for over a month. Okay, yes. I haven't even looked at it, I know. Okay. So if we haven't, and we've had a bunch of showings, and we've had, how many people have been at your open houses collectively?
How many things, 30?
Okay. So does that tell you that it's fairly priced, underpriced, or overpriced?
I would say it's overpriced.
Is Chapin the, or like condo-ish?
Yeah.
Okay, which is cool kitchen.
Yes, how do you find out how many people have so much showings? I don't know how to get it.
Well, if you're listing, you'll know, because you'll be paying attention.
Right,
Right. But it's not your listing, you gotta go to the listing meeting.
okay, right.
Right?
Yeah.
But even though it's your seller, my seller, it's the Williams listing, it's her job to have the conversation. Now, with builders in particular, you get this stubbornness sometimes. The stubbornness or ego is often tied to what does it cost me to build the damn thing? Would it be possible, let me ask you all a question, has he overbuilt the property?
And yes, he has a double oven, heated floors in the kitchen and every bathroom, and he has beautiful European windows that not only open this way, but if you turn it, it opens this way.
Oh, wow.
He has.
Which is what everybody's looking for, right?
How big is that countertop? It's like massive.
10 feet long.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's nicely done,
Mhm.
but it's very, I think it's shocking too, because that's the one room for everyone to hang out in, but then it's like everything else is kind of on like the separate floor.
So it's a vertical house.
Very vertical, yeah.
People don't want vertical.
So he's trying to make his money back, all the money that he's spent for
And it's in a garage, and, yeah,
Right.
it's a lot.
So what's gonna have to happen for those to sell?
I would drop the price.
What are you gonna drop it to?
That's a great question. So it's $6.99, and the one at the very end is $7.09.
Drop it at least 5%.
Yeah.
So conceptually, while we're gonna come back to you. So conceptually, I want you to remember the term, resistance. As it relates to the quarter, the half, the 3/4, and the full century marks. What do I mean by that? Quarter century, 25 years, $25,000. Half century, $50,000, right? So buyers think about this. So we know what about buyers? We know that they want newer versus older.
Yeah.
They want, let me just tell you, they want newer versus older. They want renovated versus not renovated. They want cul-de-sac versus busy street. They want backyard versus not backyard. That's not every buyer, but that's the vast majority of buyers, right? So my largest, think of it in terms of buyer pool. There's a greater pool of buyers for that property that is move-in condition on a cul-de-sac with a fenced backyard that has an open concept versus the properties that don't have that. There's a buying pool, but it's much smaller. So when you have a smaller buying pool, that means what? Less demand. So if you factor in, and price factors into everything, right? So the thing to note about buyers is they generally will break their prices at $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, or $100,000 marks. okay? There's an interesting tool in MLS when you get it, Luch is familiar with it, I believe, that can allow me that I can go in. So when I put a listing, when your listing is live in MLS, you can sign into your MLS account and it's going to say 304 profiles match your property. What that means is that I've taken my buyer, I put it into MLS, their profile in MLS, and it's telling that listing agent that my buyer is one of the 304 people whose profile, town, and price meet that property. There's another tool in MLS that allows me to say, okay, I'm at 709 now. How many more profiles do I get or not by lowering the price or changing the price up or down? Right? Generally, what you'll see is when you cross that century mark, there's a big jump. Everything, right?
There's a huge, dragon, like massive, so it just caught me off guard.
Yeah.
It's just inexpensive.
Yeah.
Julie's like, what the hell's going on there?
When you cross that century mark, there's generally more buyers because they bump up against the ceiling, the resistance, if they will, of being able to go over. In this case, go over 700, right? Because what do most buyers do? They try to max out their purchase price, so they're capped by whatever that is. So when you're doing price reductions, you have to be mindful of where you are on these. And being around that, that quarter, half, three-quarter, full century marks, 25,000, 50, 75,000, 100,000, or whatever it is in between, knowing that is going to help you to price the property. But you're also going to do that in relation to what's the supply and the demand on that snapshot in time when you're looking at it. Yes, Brian.
That's what I was kind of gonna ask you, was when you're doing a reduction in price, do you almost want to go a little bit lower to create, is that what you're saying, to create more buyers to maybe create,
So
like a bidding war almost, so maybe it does drive the price up, or is it more on the safe side to go just, 15,000 and 25,000 instead of 50,000?
well, so there's all kinds of
It's just this per,
pressure
yeah.
when determining price, right? What seller doesn't believe that their house is worth more than what it likely is, or isn't
Everyone.
worth more than everybody else's on the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't met a seller where that's not the case. But I've got to have that realistic conversation with the seller about what I believe the value to be and justify it. So when I'm determining value, right, I'm not giving them, hey, I think your house is worth $699. I'm saying, you know what, I think your house is worth, and I'll give them, if it's $400,000 up to about $1 million, I'll give them a $20,000 price range. Because if I can pick the price, if I can spot that price on, I should be making a whole lot more money than I'm making. It's a subjective opinion, right? When I get over $1 million, I'd probably expand that to maybe 30,000. And then I look at these factors, what's sold in the last 6 months, what's currently under agreement, what's currently active, so what's the supply, what's the current demand, and what's been happening the last 6 months to push me in the upper portion, push me higher or lower in that range that I'm giving.
I'd like to see what you would put it on the market for, you could price it,
What's that?
the Chapin.
What would you price it at? So here's what we know, right? And the other point that I'm going to get to, here's what I know, having done this for 20 years, here's the one thing Lillian and Bob will prognosticate till the cows come home. I can guarantee you it's very easy to overprice a property, even in the market like we're in, Chapin being an example.
Yeah.
I can also guarantee you that it's practically impossible, especially in today's environment, to underprice a property. Because the minute you do, you will have multiple offers and you will push that price up.
Right. That's what you were getting at. The other thing too, there's like no outdoor really living area at all. So
Okay.
the back one has like a 6 by 8 foot little.
So I'm the seller. I probably fought Lillian knowing what it cost me to build, knowing that I'm in a white hot market in Reading. Now it's taken him forever to build these things. How long have those things been on the orders? 6 months, 8 months
Yeah.
before they even. What's that?
The thing trans property, like, I don't know if it's a great term, but when your property is on the market for a long time,
What do you think?
selling really fast. Yeah.
Julie, you were looking for a home a while back, right?
Mm-hmm,
The
yep.
house was on the, as a buyer, if you saw a house had been on the market, how long ago was it?
If it was on the market for a while, then as a buyer, what I would do,
Yeah? What
I
what
would-
was your thought?
number one, you thought, what's wrong with it? So you're like, what's wrong with this house? Why is it on the market for so long? So you went in going, I want to find something wrong with it. And then if you didn't, you just go and lowball them because you're like, well, it's been on forever. So you're obviously, it's not a hot home. So I'll give you this price if I want it or not.
Right, and now what's really interesting, because what have I told you from the beginning as we're writing offers and stuff, you have to be really a part psychologist on this. So now you're dealing with the psychological barriers of resistance against these price marks, right? Very much so as a century mark, but you're also dealing with the fact that most buyers actually won't lowball. Counterintuitive to what everybody would think, right? You sit in this room and go, that property's been on the market for, and I'll give you an example. I showed a property on Saturday that's been on the market up in New Hampshire for 938 days.
Wow.
Why has it been on? Because the seller hasn't gotten an offer he's liked. Okay, so what does that tell me? Tells me the seller's stuck on his price and I probably shouldn't be wasting my time
Yeah.
or my buyer's time.
Even the builder's wife was there, I met both of them, and she was like, yeah, I'm kind of worried about the power lines there, I always have this.
But price reflects everything. Remember, once you list it, here are your choices. I can do more work to the property, which means I can invest more money to do that. There's going to be some disruption in the viewing, the seeing of the property, depending on the scope of work, or I can adjust the price to reflect that. What's going to ultimately cost me less? Adjusting the price.
And the two other ones aren't even done yet, although they have a little progress left, some of it there, which I hadn't seen yet, so.
It's irrelevant at the moment. It's relevant that you're at $699 and nothing, it hasn't sold.
Yeah.
So that tells me that the power lines, the view, the vertical nature, the lack of the outside space, and I've never been there. I've seen a few pictures at best, that it probably shouldn't be at $699.
Especially,
I was gonna talk about that.
Not that I'm aware of.
especially because we're probably coming to the end of the market that we're in.
Yeah.
So it's even more motivation to
Yeah.
lower the price before the market really shifts.
Let me tell you, one exciting conversations you're gonna have when the market does shift. Hey, Jessica, I want to sell my house. I know you sold it to me last year or 2 years ago.
Right.
And you come to me and tell me it's worth less than what I paid for it.
Yep.
Those are not fun conversations. So you gotta be able to espouse this stuff and understand this stuff and communicate this stuff. The better you can do this, the greater the chance you'll get them to price it right. Now, am I saying to you that you're always gonna get the price right? No. Have I gotten it wrong? Yes. In some cases, I've been spectacularly wrong. I'm never gonna get them 100% right. So what I challenge you to do, especially early on in your careers, is to do the analysis and then run it by somebody that's done it for a while. I'm happy to do it. Yes, ma'am.
So, in our meeting with Paul today, he said something about, interest rates being so low that it adds value.
Yeah.
So how does that, so we were saying, coming back and they're gonna be mad that their house is worth less.
Well, it's not necessarily added value. What it's doing is it's allowing buyers greater purchasing power, right? So a buyer is limited to, their purchasing power is limited by their down payment, the debt to income ratio, and what's the interest rate that it's going to cost them to borrow that money. If the interest rate is coming down, they can borrow more money,
Yeah, they can get more.
right? It's not, yes, there is a relation between the interest rates and property values.
Mhm.
It's part of what's driving today's market, right? When Sean ever talked about a 10-year, or I saw something on the news the other day, a 10-year jumbo ARM at 2.25%. I bought my first house in 1993 when Lillian sold it to me. My interest rate, and I was thrilled to get it, was 8.99%. Okay? When my brother bought his first house 6 years prior to me, that interest rate was closer to 12. I know people that had interest rates in the early 80s, 18%. Can you imagine getting a 30-year mortgage at 18%? Nuts.
So people can get more and pay, basically, not pay as high.
Right. If you go, you can go do a simple math, right?
Yeah.
if you can figure out what the payment is. If you lower the interest, it lowers your payment. So if you keep the payment the same, that means you can afford more house. In theory, right? There are other factors. That's okay. So what I want you to walk away with from today is this is not an easy thing to do. It is incredibly subjective. I guarantee you, and I'm going to ask you before we go, it's at 3:30, I'm going to ask you all, what were your values on 148 Main Street, Unit K321, just to get a sense. In fact, why don't we do it just for fun? Did you do? What was your value?
It was 269, man.
Madison?
I did 285.
85. Jonathan?
265.
Already proven my theory. Jessica? 230.
Yeah.
Mariah?
I did 225 to 235.
25 to 235. And Julie?
I had 280.
Great. Who's right?
Probably not.
I mean, there's no right number at this point.
So if I'm the seller and what you've done is you've proven my theory, which is not really a theory, is that you can get 100 agents in the room and you get 100 different values.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's not an objective process. It requires subjective evaluation of data. You guys proved the theory that you've looked at probably very similar, if not the same data, and you've come up with different interpretations of the data. It's okay. Okay? This skill will get better for you over time the more that you do it. So I didn't do this to embarrass you, but this was the result that I had expected, because it's always the result I get when I do this in boot camp. It was the last time you did it, right?
Yeah. There's a huge difference last time between people.
Right, but on a percentage basis, when you look at 225 to 285, that's a $60,000 difference. With $60,000 as a percentage of 260, it's 25-30%, right? So there's a 25% difference between the lowest and the highest price here. That's a pretty wide swing. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you is that as a practitioner, pragmatically, don't ever go into the discussion about price without knowing where your sellers are at, because you may need to tweak your formula a bit. Am I saying to you, go tell them the price they want to hear so you get the listing?
No.
No. But I'm also telling you, don't give them the lowest price for the sake of giving the lowest price and stating, well, it'll drive the price up. You can never guarantee, even in the most obvious of situations, you can never guarantee that there's going to be multiple offers. So you have to be convincing, knowing that there's a wide variety. If you know what your person's target is at least you have a fighting chance of being able to justify why your price, if their target is 285 and your data shows 225, at least you know you have to be able to explain the difference between the two.
Actually, I had 250.
Okay? Sure, correct. No. Okay.
It's okay. For me, it was hard because I didn't have pictures of the place, and there was a lot of difference between updated and what I saw in MLS. Like, there was some are updated,
Yeah.
but at the same point, it has a house that's less, it's less square footage,
Yeah.
and I think the one that recently sold was 260 or 2, it was like below it.
390.
There have been 9 that have sold in the complex.
In an actual situation too, we would have pictures.
Something.
In the actual situation, you may or may not have pictures. In the ideal world, you will have been through the property. So again, I'm a big believer if you can visit once and get the listing based on your ability as a realtor versus price. Most sellers are making a lot of decisions in part because of the price that you give them. So the way that we teach you Doesn't mean that you should do that for the rest of your life, but the way that we teach you is you're prospecting to get the face-to-face, you're getting the face-to-face to understand the objections, and so that when you have the second face-to-face, you can overcome the objections because you asked all the questions and you know what you're up against. Isn't that an easier conversation, right? Now, when you've done that a few times over a couple of years, you're going to be in a much better position to go in there and get the listing based on your ability, not on the price.
What is average condition?
I would say that average it accounts for normal wear and tear, and that's a very oblique,
What is your,
broad
where do you put it at? Where do you put it at?
in terms. I'm going to be in the upper range. I'm probably in the 269-ish, just based on what it is. I don't want to be over. She's a realistic seller. I've known her for 30 years. We've had the conversation. My seller, and that's the conversation I have with them. Here's my range. My range is going to be 259 and 269 because it's under 400. I don't want people to buy range. But I'm going to push this into the 269 because there's not a lot of inventory out there. There are a fair amount of sales in the last 6 months, so we're seeing good activity on it. But also remember that on that single family side, there's nothing in North Andover under 400,000 to speak of. So it is the only alternative to get into town. So if you've got somebody with a young family that wants to get into the school systems, this is their only way to do it if they're on a limited budget. So I believe that you'll have that opportunity. I also worry about timing, right? Where are we in the market cycle? What time of year it is? Let me tell you about how the market cycles, right? In a traditional year, not a non-COVID year, not an election year. The market cycle goes something like this. The spring market starts somewhere in middle to late March, depending on weather. If you had a very mild winter, it starts much earlier. If you have so I'll give you an example. This winter, last winter, we had one snowstorm with 6 inches of snow, and that was it. The light went on in January, and we've been running ever since. Okay, I'll go back to 2015, where there was not a single snowflake in January until January 25th. And we were humming right along in 2015. And then that first snowflake fell. And for the next 6 weeks, there was 9 feet of snow. Okay? Not only did we get stuck, there were no sales because you couldn't see a house. Right? So the market kind of stalled and didn't kick back in until, it was mid-April, and we were showing houses with piles of snow at the end of the driveway and everything else. But your spring market generally goes from somewhere, call it mid-March, depending on weather. Prep your people always, because as you start prospecting in the fall now, you can say, well, we're going to wait for the spring market.
Yeah.
Say, great, you need to have your house ready by January 1, because if it's a mild winter, you want to be one of the first ones on the market, not one of the last ones on the market. Your spring market generally goes to the end of June. Again, non-COVID year. What's happening at the end of June? 2 things. Number 1, schools are out. Number 2, 4th of July is right around the corner, and that's a big vacation weekend. It kicks off the vacation season for the summer. Your summer generally is relatively quiet, July more than August. You'll come into September. Once September, what happens in September? Schools go back into session. When? Generally after Labor Day. So generally, right, that first weekend after Labor Day is really kind of the unofficial kickoff of the fall season. The fall season runs till roughly mid-November. Then you've got what? The holidays, and it will depend. Sometimes you get a busy December because it's mild and there's been a lot of demand. Sometimes it's quiet. It really depends. I will tell you, I've seen my 4th presidential election. I'm surprised we're going to start seeing the market, in my humble opinion, if I have to predict, we're going to start to see it quiet a little bit. Why? Because the noise of the election is just going to heat up. And it's a rancorous election, regardless of what it's not a political statement, it's just, when we see this type, it just gets quiet.
Scared too, and they hold on to money, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Why and why? They get scared because of this word. Yeah, uncertain. I know it's not wrong, whatever. Yeah, it's uncertainty. Whether you're in the financial markets or whether you're in the real estate market, uncertainty is not a good thing. It's going to cause people to hold up and hold on to their money. Unlike the stock market, which sometimes clients say, well, worry, for those of you that are market prognosticators, the real estate market does not. The real estate market, if the stock market's doing good, the real estate market generally does good. When the stock market's bad, it depends. Okay. But you have to look at the supply and demand. So other things, just because we're running tight on time. When I'm actually doing my fair evaluation, here's what I do. I have an unfiltered and a filtered view. What's my unfiltered view? My unfiltered view is I'm looking at town and I'm taking at least a $50,000, if not $100,000 price bracket to look at what's going on in the marketplace. I'm looking at active under agreement sold. I'm looking for that 30,000 foot view. What's happened? What's happening now? How many properties are on the market? How many properties have gone under agreement? How many have sold? Okay. You're going to hear this word called absorption rate. Write that down. Okay. Absorption rate. What is absorption rate? It's the number of homes that are being purchased over a period of time. So when you look at sold, you generally want to take the number of sold divided by the number of months that you're looking at. If it's 6 months, you divide by 6 months. If it's 3 months, divide by 3 months. So if you have 24 homes that have sold in the last 6 months, your absorption rate is what? 4 per month. You've just basically taken the 24, the total that have been sold, divided by the number of months. It gives you an average. It gives you a pace. Okay. Then you can take that and look at, okay, where am I at under agreement? Well, I only have 1 under agreement, but I have 10 actives. That probably tells me I'm a little bit oversupplied and the demand's a little bit light. I have 10 under agreements and I have 1 active. That probably tells me there's a lot of demand and there's no supply. Okay. And everybody knows supply and demand are, what's the right word? They are, I forget it. I forget what the right term is, but
Dependent on each other?
they are dependent on, there's a specific word and I'll think of it in a minute.
Correlate,
What's that?
is it correlate?
They do correlate for sure. So it's not the word that I'm thinking of, but anyway, so that's what absorption rate is important to know. Okay. Now, imagine you are trying to explain this all to your sellers in particular. How much fun are you going to have trying to correlate this to them?
Maybe it was mesh.
Mesh.
Funny, on all the words that you've misspelled tonight, today, it's always been the I's that you forget. Uncertainty, you forgot that. Absorption, you forgot the I. And the other word too, earlier, you forgot the I. It's just funny that it's like always the
How do
I.
Fire
you
me.
spell algorithm?
I have no idea. Google it.
It's with an I. You spelled it with a Y.
You're a good speller here, not me. I'm not. Have you spelled it?
So you have this unfiltered view, so it's just town and general price range. The filter view, generally here's how I break it down when I'm doing analysis. I look at town, right? Because I'm only going to compare properties within one town. With rare exceptions, very rare exceptions. If you think you need to go out of town, come see me and we'll have that discussion so I can help you. Okay? Then I'm looking at style. What do I mean by style? Are you comparing a colonial to a contemporary or a cape or a split or a garrison or a craftsman, a salt box or whatever? You want to compare like houses to like houses. Comparing a colonial to a ranch, don't do it. Unless there's no data, then come see me. Okay? So I filter by town first. I filter by style. I only want to look at similar style homes. Then I generally will filter by number of bedrooms. Right? If you can't compare 3-bedroom colonials because yours is a 3-bedroom colonial, but there are only 2 and 4-bedroom colonials available that are sold comparables, you're going to have to make an adjustment. Okay? I'm going to tell you, unfortunately, our adjustments are a little bit more gut feel based on a whole lot of other data than it is a mechanical adjustment like the appraisers do, because I disagree that a bedroom is worth $10,000 every single time at every time in the market. It's not. Okay, from there, I might filter out, I still have too much data. Too much data for me is if I have more than, in combination, I have more than 115 properties. I don't want to be comparing dozens upon dozens of properties. I want to get down to 3 active, 3 under agreement, 3 sold in an ideal world that closely meet and or match the subject property. So I might go to square footage. Now, sometimes I monkey around with bedrooms and square footage. I might do it because I've got this larger home that has fewer bedrooms, or I've got a smaller home that has a lot of bedrooms, right? Because you can have a 1,000 square foot home that has 3 or 4 bedrooms. You ain't gonna be moving around a lot in there, and you're not gonna be putting king bedrooms in each of the bedrooms, but it can be done. Okay, when I'm looking at that distance component within that mile radius, don't use the mile radius as a hard out, but look at it from how close is the property. Obviously, properties on the same street are very helpful. Properties on the street at half a mile away may or may not be helpful. I'd rather have you show me a house that's much further away, but in an almost similar or identical neighborhood in terms of neighborhood composition than showing me based on that mile. I'd rather see something in West Andover compared to something down in South Andover because the neighborhoods are similar versus trying to stay within that mile.
Question.
Yep.
When do you take into account like what's going on around like the neighborhood or like?
For example.
So, that listing appointment that I went on, there's a bunch of construction or whatever, and she's insisting that it's going to be worth a lot more because of what's being built up around. So do you take into consideration that, or do you just go on how base what is the now?
I would certainly take it under advisement and analyze it from the perspective of, is what she's telling me true?
Yeah.
Oh, no, because
Yeah, she's.
No problem. Right. So I want you to be as objective as possible, but this is a totally subjective exercise. That's why we have how many different values on one on the same unit, right? You need to be able to have seen the unit before you. And again, Lillian, probably not so much. I really believe that you, as early in your career, you need to go see these properties before you're starting to say, here's what the value is. And my way out of that, when I go see people, is when they say, so what do you think the value is? My response is, I don't know, I gotta go do the analysis. It would be I'd be remiss to give you a value now because I haven't done the analysis. And now I spurt out a number, and now I set an expectation that I might contradict once I've done the analysis. Would you rather have me do the analysis and give you what I believe to be the most accurate number possible?
If you're going to do a showing, do you do it ahead of time based on the pictures, or do you also say the same thing?
I don't go into a showing predetermining that I'm going to write an offer, at least with rare circumstances. If it's with somebody I've never met, I don't. If it's somebody that I've worked with for a while, maybe, especially in a competitive situation like this.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's not worth, my humble opinion, I think you're wasting a lot of time doing that in terms of, I'd rather have you spend the prep on reading what the property is, not that you need to memorize it, but at least be familiar with it. Right? I always go to a property when I'm showing the property, I go in and I print out 2 copies of the listing, the full listing in MLS, and then I print out 1 copy of all of the disclosures, of which I read before I go to the property, just in case I get asked a question. I can say I've read it, but I don't remember it, or I can refer to it. I give my client or buyer, I'll give them the packet, the listing, and all of the disclosures, and I hold on to the listing myself. So when they ask a question, I say, let me refer to it. Why? Because it's not my listing. I don't know much about it.
What about stuff like I saw this one that you have, doesn't have air conditioning, but every unit that I compare to is central air, is that?
It does have central air.
Oh, it does?
All the units do because they all have. And again, you don't know that,
Okay.
but it's a good question to ask. Good for you for catching it. All the units have heat pumps
So why did it say no?
because that's how the town classifies it. That's the town stuff. It has central air. Every unit over there has central air. In fact, she has a brand new. In fact, she has a new condenser that was just put on the roof for her 2 years ago.
That proves his point though about the whole public record and everything. She hasn't sold it. I mean, she's lived there since '99.
She bought it when it was new.
Yeah, So nobody's ever walked in there to actually
Got it.
verify all this stuff.
Yeah, because that definitely affected my view of the property.
Of course it did.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, now I am always happy to help you do your market analysis. What I prefer you do, or let me say what I prefer you not do. Don't come to me and say, hey, what's this worth? Come to me and say, here's the subject property, here's my analysis, and let's look at it together. I may stop you and say, okay, hold on, let me go look for myself. But I want you to do the work so that we can use it as a learning opportunity if need be. You may knock it out of the park and get what I believe to be the right value. And again, your value and my value may be different. But let's have that discussion as to why it's different. You might be right, I might be wrong. Right? Just because I've done this long, it doesn't guarantee I get it right.
Could you, if you're going to like a subject, could you say that, you know, with the team here,
Yeah.
you had someone else review it too, or is it?
You know, if I get the sense, and I used to do this quite honestly when I first started out, I got the sense that they knew I was a rookie, because if I got referred to one of my friends that said, that knew I was only in business for 6 months or a year, the way that I approached it was I did my analysis and I ran it by William, or I ran it by Aaron, and I would challenge you should do that anyway, because it will help you to hone your skill, your evaluation skills much faster. Okay, and it's also will give Lily or I or whoever you're working with the opportunity to probe and make sure that you've actually asked the right questions in your pre-qualification efforts, because when you get to the market analysis, I don't want you, my preference is not to throw 800 properties at you and say, here's why. I want to take you through probably no more than 3 properties. I want to bring you in the office. We're going to look up on the screen. I'm going to bring up the property. I'm going to say, here's my presentation, Ms. Seller. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. I know you're here to determine value. I'm going to walk you through this. Humor me for a moment. What do you think the value of your property is? Oh, that's your job, Eric. You tell me. No, seriously, because I've already printed this material that you're going to take out. It's right there. The value is in there. It's not a magic trick. I can't change it from here. But what do you think the value is? And I write it down based on the value. Again, it confirms for me what I either interpreted from my prior conversation, or it's going to help me understand where their head's at. Then I say, okay, let's go up on screen, and I talk to them about how I've done this. I looked at active under unit sold. I looked at the similar properties within close proximity, and I've come up with several properties that I would like you to tell me what you think, how they compare to your property. So I start with the sold, and here I like to give them, if I only have 3 sold, I'd be happy. Here's the 3 sold, how does this compare? I say, I'll do this. With rare exception, even if this number is way off at the beginning, if I've done my job helping them by asking questions, not telling them, by asking questions about how their property compares to what they see on the screen, and if I get an answer that I know is kind of way off because they're not being realistic, then I'll start asking other questions to kind of drag them back into reality. It's a rare day that I can't get a seller to say, okay, my value was X, and when I open my magic book, the number is pretty darn close to what they thought. Why? Because I already knew what answer I wanted to get them to, so that helps me. I've done it for a long time, but it helps me to ask the questions I need to get them to that value. It doesn't mean they're going to hire me. That's a different issue. But people will make decisions based on your ability to explain, and you never want a seller to get up and go, I don't know how you got that number. You will probably get a seller to go up and go, my house is not worth that. It's worth 10 times that. Okay, well, let's have that discussion. Why do you think so? And do we account for that? Have I had sellers come back and say, I think you're off? Okay, so here's what I'm willing to do. You have a choice, and I have a choice. I'm willing to take your number, Mr. Seller, but guess what? In this market, in the first 14 days, if we don't have 8 to 10 showings, and we don't have an offer, then we're overpriced. If we have 10 or more showings, we're overpriced by a little. If we have 8 or less showings, we're overpriced by a lot. Would you agree with me that we can pre-sign a price reduction? I've done that too, pre-sign a price reduction. I hope I'm willing. If you get more money, that's my job. My job is to get you that highest amount with the best possible terms and conditions, with the least amount, of aggravation. it's in my best interest to maximize those dollars for you, but, you know, you're gonna have people that are very knowledgeable, you're gonna have people that are very not so knowledgeable. And so sometimes I use their experience and their lack of experience against them. Okay, so you want $1.5 million for your property, but it's only worth, like those folks on the antique. I had to go help them understand why the value was, and I told them that we were in a little bit of a turning of the market. Nobody else told them that. It cost me my job, but at least I know I told them the right thing, and I guess I was vindicated in the end, although I didn't make the money. Oh well. That's doing business. But to understand, you have to be able to articulate this. Like your contracts, you have to take your analysis and be able to boil it down into a 10-minute conversation and be able to get them to understand how you got to the value you got. They may not agree with it, but they need to understand it. Lots of information today. Question. What's that?
Ask a lot of questions.
Julie, any questions?
Not right now.
Okay, it'll be easier for you in Madison once you guys are tied into MLS. You'll have a greater level of data to be able to choose from and kind of say, okay, you know, here's why I think the two are comparable. But once you finish your paperwork, you're up running, you're saying that that's the 14th?
Yeah.
Okay, no pressure.
It's kind of funny that you kind of got the same value without MLS.
I know, I thought that,
What does that tell you?
Yeah.
that,
It tells you that there's data out there. If you guys can do it, don't you think your sellers can do it?
mhm.
They have access, well, they have access to public records. We just have access to a lot more data in a consolidated place or in a singular place that should allow us to more readily and more easily do the evaluation. But don't doubt for a second, somebody selling their house who doesn't have access to the MLS isn't going to be spending the time to know what's going on, especially if they're engineers or engineer-like. If you're dealing with an engineer, you better have sharpened your pencil. You better have been able to calculate the numbers down to the 10th, you know, the 100th decimal point, because they're going to ask those types of questions, right? So know your subject, right? How do you know your subject? Again, you go on the first face-to-face to qualify them, and as you're qualifying them, you get to know them and what's important to them. Okay, so don't discount the two parts PMA process, especially in the beginning, because it will help you to kind of line up what you're up against and help you better project into that situation the answers that the questions that you need to get to the answers that you want. Okay, it sounds like you're manipulating them. Welcome to sales. You're manipulating to a degree. Okay. Am I wrong? Okay. Your ability to sell has everything to do with persuading people and get them to understand your position. They don't have to agree with it. You don't have to agree with theirs. If you want the job, you might have to agree with their value, but you may come with a caveat. Right? And again, I have been spectacularly wrong. And then I said to sellers, when I get spectacularly wrong, guess what? You were right. I was wrong. But thank you for that commission. Mariah, questions?
Yes. So when you, so in my situation, I have a seller, like a potential seller that would only, well, they want to get a certain amount for their place or they want to hold on to it. So
Okay.
when would you consider doing all this work if there isn't a contract signed?
Well, I guess how do you leave it with them, right? Because there are a lot of people that will make their selling decision based on what they can get for the property in terms of timing. Yes, I'm willing to sell it now because I'm told I can get the value for it. The other thing is a lot of people will make their decision on who sells it for them based on what they're told and how persuasive you are in that conversation. So your job is to always find the light at the end of the tunnel, right? When you're staring into the abyss that we stared into in 2007, you got to figure out a way to have conversations with sellers and figure out what their motivation, timing, and value is, so get them on the market to sell, because they still have to sell the property even though the market is terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Just like you're having conversations with buyers now, you got to have conversations with buyers now that want to buy, but they don't want to buy at the top of the market. Okay, well, you either want to buy or you don't want to buy. buying at the top of the market comes with risk, but that risk is directly correlated to one's time frame in the house, right? If you buy a house, when I first bought my first house, I was prone to being picked up and moved across the country or out of the country almost every 2 years. So when I bought my house, the conversation I had with my wife and I had with Lillian was, hey, Lillian, we need to buy a house that, where are we in the market cycle? Does it make sense for us to buy a house? It did, because we were at the beginning of an appreciating market. It probably wouldn't make sense for me in that same situation today to buy today, because 2 years from now, if I'm going to get transferred, I could be staring into the other side of the hill on the way down. And what I paid for the property is now, the property is going to be less worth. So if I'm in my property for a longer time horizon, there's a greater chance of smoothing out that risk.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the conversation you and I need to have on Thornville is, what's the work that they're doing on it? What's really their motivation for selling? Are they going to test the market? Do they really need to sell? And then within that, there's a whole bunch of questions. So we can
Okay.
check anything.
Not at the moment.
Do we anything?
No, I'm good right now.
Jonathan? Nelson?
Good.
Helpful?
Yeah.
So food camp is formally over. I am happy to get one or more of you. That's okay. Friday or
When do we get the diploma?
Yeah, we're trying to any
your commission is, your first commission is your first diploma. I'm happy to help you at any time. I'm happy to get together with you as a group or individual. Just give me a heads up and let me know what you need, and I'll be happy to help you, get you a resource to help you, okay? You have lots yet to learn, but you've really at least got a foundational basis now that will help. In my humble opinion, you're already better trained than most of the idiots that are out there, as long as you've retained a small fraction of what we talked about.
I actually do have a question.
Sorry, I said no.
I wrote in my planner that we have a meeting tomorrow, but
Nope.
we don't.
You have Zilla tomorrow at 2. I may have sent inadvertently an agent.
We do, so we do, we have a Zillow.
Yeah, Zilla, that's it. There's no more agent.
Friday, good.
I just need to know, because I'm planning on, like I said, maybe doing more Zoom.
Yep.
Because of the test, so I didn't know, what.
I don't think we're gonna be able to do Zoom on Zillow. We tried last time with Julia, but because Zillow is a Zoom,
Yeah.
we can't have the Zoom over the Zoom,
Zoom?
so it wasn't working.
That was a TV show, and that was a show. Zoom. Look it up.
It's my high school.
Yeah.
All right. Anything I can do for any of you? I gotta go on for any of you, I guess.
The Zoom.
I'm gonna go Zoom. So here's a little outline of what we talked about. Julie, I already emailed it to you.
Yep, I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
See you, Julie.
Bye, guys. Thank you.